Hello and welcome to the Leaders in Supply Chain and Logistics podcast. I am your host, Radu Palamariu, Group CEO of Velvet Global. Our mission is to connect the supply chain ecosystem by bringing forward some of the most interesting leaders in the industry.
Delighted to have with us today Jim Tobojka, who is the Chief Operating Officer of TE Connectivity, where he leads global operations, supply chain, and manufacturing across a 16 billion plus industrial tech powerhouse. Many of you know TE Connectivity really makes the invisible essential. So their connectors, their sensors, their products are inside everything from electric vehicles, smart factories to life-saving medical devices. They have close to 100,000 employees and they enable the technology behind how the world moves, powers up and connects. Jim, pleasure to have you with us today and thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure too, Radu. Thank you for inviting me for this podcast.
And maybe let's start with yourself. You've had such a long career that's taken you really all over the world. When you look back, what would you say are some key inflection points, those moments in your career that really made the most difference to where you are today?
Thank you for the question. When I kind of reflect back on my career, I can think of three specific inflection points. Probably the first one, which was the most influential for me, which got me into operations, was the first plant manager appointment. And again, it was done very early in my career. I was 24 years old and I was freshly in a management training program in American Power Conversion, a US based, Rhode Island based company that was making uninterruptible power supplies. And we were going through a kind of an operational crisis. And I was being trained in manufacturing engineering at the time, where I was doing time and motion studies and process improvements on the shop floor. And there was a bit of a problem with backlog. And the current leadership said, hey, we need to make an organizational change. The current production manager and plant manager is not working out. Jim, can you come in and serve as an interim leader for this area? And of course, I was overwhelmed with that kind of responsibility, but I knew if I don't, challenge myself, I would never really be given an opportunity like this again. So I raised my hand and said, yep, I'll do it. I need support, but I'll do it. And basically, it's like baptism by fire. I was thrown into the deep end of the swimming pool and I was asked to kind of run this turnaround. And we got things turned around relatively quick. And within a few months, we were clearing up the backlog and we were basically current and we were, running very smoothly. And then I was running around town in parts of the factories we had in Rhode Island, parts of the factories we had in the US. We had a factory in Fort Myers, Florida. And I was asked to kind of turn around those operations as well. So it was a great inflection point, number one. Number two was, after doing that for a few years, we then were going to set up our operations in Asia. And I was asked to take a general management post in operations for the Philippines. And I knew nothing about the Philippines. I basically just had a fresh passport and
Yeah.
didn't really understand what I was getting myself into, but they allowed me to go out there for a few weeks to kind of see what and scope out what the place was about. And I was single. And I remember I tell this story to a lot of my close friends and people. I walked into this role with a laptop, a set of golf clubs, and a suitcase. And that's how I started moving out to Asia. And we were producing one product. We had one facility. We had about 50 operators and a very, I would say, early management staff, in the various functional areas. And we were just starting out. And it was great, amazing experience. And we grew that operation to $1.5 billion of sales revenue, 8 factories later, several thousand people, several thousand SKU combinations to something as simple as a small UPS the size of a bread box. We were making a megawatt system that was powering and backing up data centers. So you talk about evolution of the organization over like 15 years I spent time there. It was just enormous inflection point and great learning and just a great overall experience. I met my wife there. I had 2 daughters there. We built a house there. She had businesses. I mean, I had a real life there. And then the third inflection point was when Schneider Electric acquired APC. And my role for a few years stayed the same, but then I was offered an opportunity to move to Singapore to handle a regional and a more senior level post where, Schneider was a much larger organization than APC, multiple business units, multiple product families, etc. And I was given a role to run the East Asia, Japan, and Pacific region, which had, I think at the time, it was like 24 factories, and Pacific would be New Zealand, Australia, and then Northern Asia would be Japan and Korea. Then we had sites throughout Southeast Asia, and we had a remote site, actually also an equipment site in Pakistan. Didn't get a chance to go there, but I did have my visa prepared to go there. So was given another assignment after that. So I thought that was the third inflection point in my career, which kind of catapulted me into other, senior level posts in Schneider Electric, and ultimately landed me an opportunity here at TE Connectivity, where I had a couple of segment posts in my current role as in the corporate operations and the COO position, running our global operations function inside TE Connectivity. I spent a few years there in Singapore, and I recently relocated to Boston to be a little bit closer to my daughters who are in college here. So those are my
Yes.
inflection points.
Yeah, well, quite some stories. And I didn't know that. I mean, we've known each other for a long time. I didn't know the story of you going to the Philippines initially with just a laptop, a bunch of clubs, and a couple of suitcases, and coming back with the family. Now,
Well, Radu, I just moved to Boston, and I was laughing. I have four pets. I have three ladies, my wife and two daughters, and several containers,
doesn't.
and still a set of golf clubs. So
Love it. And now on TE specifically, I know that you've come a long way. I think the company has done tremendously well in the last years, is on a very good growth path. And then specifically for operations, you've been driving some great initiatives. I think under the acronym of ION, it started more in logistics. Now it's transforming all facets of your operation. So maybe walk us through a little bit what ION is, and then where it started in logistics, and then let's walk through the different accomplishments and lessons learned.
absolutely. So when I reflect on my current role, I've been in this role since January, about 18 months ago. So what, January 24? And I kind of look back at what we've accomplished in those 18 months. Well, we created the Integrated Operations Network, or what the acronym of ION. And ION kind of was born from our ability to see how we were able to turn around our global logistics function, because that was a function which, was hovering at almost 7.5, almost 8% of cost, of logistics cost to sales. So you can do the math. And I thought that this would be a great opportunity for us to really leverage the global opportunities in logistics, both transforming the team to tackle, I would say, negotiations, vendor simplification, strategy around flow and touch points, and consolidation of freight and mode. And we tackled all of these elements of the program, and we brought that down to historically low levels. I mean, we finished last year at 3%.
Oh, wow.
And at some points this year we're at 2.5%. So I think there's not much more to do there. Yes, of course you can squeeze more out of it. There's always continuous improvement. There's always areas to get better. But I think we've done a lot of work to help simplify the logistics cost for the group. And we operate with 10 businesses. We touch 14 industries. It's a very global and diverse network. We have quite a bit of localization where we produce in region. We have supplier base in region, but there still was opportunity to really simplify those intercontinental flows, both from an air, sea, road, and mixed mode shipment perspective. So then, we kind of stepped back for a second. And as I came into the role, I said, well, let's look at the full value chain, not just the deliver side of things and the freight side of things. Why not tackle the whole value chain?
Yes.
Looking at source, make, deliver, and then we even got into the development area. Why I say development, we don't develop products, but we engage with the engineering teams to bring those products to manufacturing and to our customers. So we got to get upstream and involved early in the process to really perfect quality, to perfect and deliver on time, on quality, on cost. And when you're able to do that across the whole value chain, Ion was born. Ion is
Mm.
born where we saw benefits that TE is a first and foremost a BU driven organization. So we have 10 businesses. And then we as the function are there to enable the businesses to create value. And we can do that through leveraging TE's size and scale. And, in some instances, the complexity gets in our way. How do we help simplify that complexity to bring real value to our customers? The three stakeholders, or the three bubbles we like to call it in TE: the customers, the shareholders, and our employees. And when we look at those three bubbles, those are when we think about what we want to do, it's always with those three in mind. And then the businesses help create that value for the customers. They help to integrate with those customers and interface with them, and we're there to support them. So how do we do that? Well, we came up with a great example on logistics. Well, what else could we do? We could work on sourcing. We could become best in class in procurement transformation. So we tackled that. We felt like we had some opportunities there, both in the material side of things, the indirect side of things, and just the way we efficiently run our procurement function from a commodity strategy perspective, from a vendor rationalization perspective, and what kind of digitization technologies can we bring to help make the experience of when we work with our suppliers and when we provide the materials for our factories, how can we do it more seamlessly? So digitizing that and bringing that to world-class levels. So we are doing that through Supply On as we speak. So that is an initiative we drew out. And then when we look at planning, we thought planning would be a great area to really leverage that. And we have not been known to be one of the best planning organizations. So I felt like this would be a great area for us to really think about how can we become, again, truly operationally excellent and world-class in planning. So there's a digital side of things. There is a control tower on the freight. There's a control tower in the plants, and then there's the control tower you have with your supplier base, which is really that supply on element. So connecting all of those seamlessly, and then bringing real insights there to help us run it efficiently. And then you kind of go through the rest of it. We did some work in our process and technology space. We also are leveraging what we call our operational excellence system, which is TOA. That is the operating advantage system inside TE, which is our continuous improvement methodology, and really bringing that mindset in our plants, in our functions to really drive a continuously improved organization through an alignment on the strategy. And then I would say, last but not the least, you got to go after the talent. And I felt like that there is an element like you can only go so far with the people you have. And if you have great people, you can achieve great things. So what are you doing to prepare your people for bigger opportunities? What are you doing to attract the right people in some of the roles you have in the organization? What are you going to do to drive that performance in the group? And I thought that was a really important element inside of things that we had to think about. So I kind of reflect on it. It's 18 months into the journey. We've had some great progress in the procurement space, great progress in planning, great progress in just driving adoption and synergizing across the whole network, and trying to have those teams kind of coordinate better. But we will never change our operating model. It's always going to be BU driven model. It's like, well, what can we do to kind of help everybody come up to speed faster and be better across the organization? That's what I see our job.
Hmm. Love it. And I want to ask you because it's such a holistic approach. And when we put out the book Source to Soul about 3 years ago, and that was one of the very key messages of all those executives that we interviewed in the book, is that you got to think end to end. You got to think holistic about your value chain. Really, I love how you even brought in R&D and the development side of the product, because again, you can do a lot of savings on the procurement side, but if the design of the product itself is flawed, or maybe not ideal, let's not say flawed, but it's maybe not ideal from what materials go into it. There's only that much that you can do. So if you can work with those stakeholders as well in the R&D side, it's really holistic. Now, the $1 million question, because I'm sure that a lot of people have this in operations, they have this intent to push through this end-to-end kind of strategies and link. However, what I've seen, a lot of them fail for various reasons. So when you think of what really made the difference, what made this a success, and obviously you're going on the path of success in T, what would you say the real key elements? Is it convincing the CEO, the board? What is it that really made this, okay, this worked for us because we did X, Y, Z really well?
First of all, I think you need to have broad support. Like I have strong support from my boss, the CEO of the group, Terrence Curran. He is just 100% behind us here. And then the executive committee members, so the segment presidents, the other functional leaders, that are at that level, our CFO, et cetera, they're behind it. So I got the broad support at the executive level. Then we brought it into leadership council, which is integrating all of our business unit leaders, general managers. We brought it to them, and they felt like they could extract value from this. So I think when you give them something where they see the value, they'll pull from you. If you're kind of operating on an island and not really communicating and not getting and really understanding clearly what their problem points are, you won't get that pull or that support and alignment. There'll be a lot of resistance. So I think it really starts with making sure you hear them, making sure you understand clearly what their business points are, understand their nuances and differences, because we operate in 10 businesses, 14 industries. So what makes them unique and different? And how can we help them? I think when they start to see, you know, what you can offer and what you can bring to the party, I think they'll invite you to the party, and they'll want you, they'll give you time and add them to the agenda of the party. So, there's great, I mean, the great example was logistics. We brought real value to them. So we brought a team that had enormous credibility gap issues, and now we have a team that is credibly successful, and a lot of people depend on them to deliver. So it's like, well, how do you bring in leaders that have that level of credibility? How can another great example is quick wins, bringing value to them early on in the transformation so they feel the value. And if they can start to feel it, then they'll own it and they'll start to work with you. And we don't care who gets the credit. We want the company to get the credit. So we're happy when the BUs take the lead and start to pull from some of the things that we may have kickstarted for them. But the point is, if the BUs are able to get that value, it's great for TE. And that's all we want. We want TE to strive and succeed and become known for world-class operational and supply chain excellence. That's what's going to help us just create more value for our customers if we're able to portray that and for them to talk about us in that light. And that's the greatest compliment, was when your customers and your other stakeholders talk about you in a positive light. Say, hey, yeah, they're really adding value. Hey, they really understand our business. Hey, they really are engaging the right way. And they listen and empathize with customers, they empathize with us, and there's a real partnership there.
And I think that's that you hit the nail on the head on a few things, because a lot of times supply chain and operations professionals, they end up kind of in their own little bubble, in their own little world. They fail to communicate, or they fail to communicate enough. And as you rightfully said, sometimes you got to over communicate. There was a saying to the lines of, when you're feeling that you're a parrot, that's only when your message is starting to land. When you feel that you've said it so many times that you're sick of yourself, only then is it starting to land. Because in these big organizations, and you're talking thousands and thousands of people, many stakeholders, you got to do a lot of repetition, and then repetition coupled with, well, here's how the results and here's how the impact is starting to play out. You don't need to trust me that in 3 years down the line you start to see results. You're starting to see results today. So marrying long and short term, these are some of the things that make a lot of difference. Now, specifically, a question that I wanted to ask you is, there's also a lot of hype around, you have AI, you have automation, you have a flood of technologies and and innovations. Typically now it's under the something to do with AI in today's world. When you look from where you sit, right, how do you also distinguish what is really creating value and real margin versus what is cool pilot projects that really just go nowhere and don't add up to anything?
Well, I mean, in the case of AI, there's obviously tons of hype, but there are real use cases that matter. So I think it's we're not immature on this journey. We've been several years down the road on this journey. In fact, I think we have a pretty advanced AI strategy when it comes to how we can leverage engineering, how we can leverage Ion and other functional areas of the company. So our strategy still needs to mature, but I think it's on a path to really extract value. So we have like a COE that's AI transformative, which partners exactly with our TIS organization, which is our IT function. So you have the TI organization that is really crafting the data strategy, and then we have the COE that is being, AI specific around transformation and how do we build use cases to drive innovation, to drive the transformation and adoption. So we have lots of activity happening in this area. I mean, of course, many people would say, show me the money, show me the return. And that's not easy, right? So, but you get obvious use cases that are just showing up in multiple areas. So we do a lot of external discussions and benchmarking in this area. So when you talk about, well, what are the obvious use cases? You may have a forecasting opportunity. You may have a predictive maintenance opportunity. You may have an area that you want to go in and try to optimize your quality and your process, situation in your operation. So it really depends on what kind of manufacturing you are or what kind of business you're in. There are different areas that you can kind of navigate towards to drive innovation, specifically enabling this kind of, you know, AI technology. And I feel we have some great, I would say, innovation happening inside TE in this space, and it's quite exciting. And we're looking at what else can we do, and I think that's the that's the partnership because we don't want to be left behind. We don't want to not take this and take advantage of this tremendous shift, but we also want to make sure it's bringing real value. We're pragmatic. We want to bring real value to the group and drive what can help us, both our customers, shareholders, and our people.
And you mentioned, and that's music to my ear as a recruitment and such business owner. You mentioned talent, and you mentioned that talent has that kind of key purpose to continue to develop Ion over the long term. And in this combination of AI and constant upskilling, and well, it's really a pace that we've never seen, I think, in our lifetime in terms of how fast things move. How do you how do you keep your staff and your team constantly learning, evolving, unlearning, relearning? Are there certain things that you do at TE that you can share?
I mean, multi-pronged approach. So you got to do an organizational assessment. So when you're kind of setting up a strategy like Ion for the start, you got to create an aspiration and an ambition, right? So that's got to be something like, wow, that is dramatically different than where we are today. So it gets people kind of like maybe a little bit nervous, a little bit anxiety, but a little bit excited. So imagine like if you sat down and 5 years later you're able to get all this accomplished, what would it be like to work in a company like that? It's going to be tremendous. And then you then take a step back as a leader and say, do I have the right team? Not today to run the business, but to achieve this. So you kind of have to have a little bit of a tough conversation with yourself about your team and start to say, do I have the right people in the right roles? Can they be upskilled at the pace I need to upskill them to achieve this, 5-year aspirational objective? Some cases you could say yes, in other cases you may say no. So you do have to start to upgrade and shift your team towards the high performing culture that will ultimately achieve that 5-year, vision and strategy. So I think you got to do that early on and make some calls on some of your leadership team, because you can't get anything done by yourself. You're just one person and you can't be everywhere. So you got to have a team that can really drive the expertise, because you're talking about enormous expertise into very technical topics. So be it planning, procurement, manufacturing, engineering, and so forth. You got to have the right people in the right roles that have the right skill sets, that are credible subject matter experts that can shift people's minds and influence the organization, because you're talking about a structure that requires enormous influence and credibility. We're not talking about a large, I would say, centralized organization. In fact, our organization is rather decentralized. And I would say it requires small COEs, centers of operational excellence. And there we need to drive change through influence. We need to drive change through adoption of best practices. We need to drive change through synergies. And I think that's a different skill set. And some people can succeed in an environment like that. I think it's the hardest to do, but others cannot, because they want to have that centralized control and command kind of structure. So to succeed in TE in some of these higher level functional roles or leadership roles, the influence skills, the credibility, expertise skills, and being comfortable in your own skin, not having everybody report to you, but having enough organizational clout to shift the organization towards that vision that we've created. And I think that's why some people succeed and other people fail, because they're not comfortable in roles like that. So I think it's exciting. I think those kinds of roles are very rewarding when you're able to really see the adoption in the organization shift, and then the mindset shift. So you do that through exposing people in different aspects, either a business change, because we have 10 businesses, or a segment role or a functional role, or you allow them to maybe geographically move. Some people maybe just need some further education. Maybe it's financial acumen. Maybe it's more about adoption of AI practices, understanding what that technology is doing. Or maybe it's just more about problem solving methodology. Giving them those skill sets and that training and education that they need to kind of move up the ladder. And then, finally, it's just building that experience, broad experience. So if you can create a profile, like the roles before were very operationally focused, plant management, multi-plant management, and then not understanding on how all these pieces work together. So not having that procurement, planning, logistics, even, NPI slash, new product introduction experience, but having that broad experience, even in health and safety and quality and strategy for that matter. I think you get people that have that kind of, I would say, like maybe it's a Swiss Army knife experience sometimes. It gives them the perspective on how all these pieces work together. So when they make a decision, they know how that kind of translates either upstream or downstream. And that's the leaders I'd like to see in some of these more senior level roles, because they can really look at things, as you brightly said, end to end.
Mm. And final question for you, Jim. If I'm, let's say, just graduating and I want to have a illustrious career, I want to make it to the C-suite like you did as a CEO one day, what would be one or two pieces of advice that you would give me to make the most impact in my future career?
Uh, I mean, there's this expression, you got to be bold. So nothing's ever been accomplished without being bold. And I'm not saying you need to go out there and take enormous risk, but you gotta have you gotta have the ability to put yourself outside your comfort zone. So it could be a new role, it could be a new industry, it could be a new company. I mean, sometimes most of the bigger companies have a lot of opportunity. So I wouldn't always say the grass is greener outside, but it can be sometimes, depending on what you're getting exposed to in your existing company. But what I will say is trying to get broad exposure. Moving around every 2 to 3 years is okay in different functions inside a global company. if there are roles to kind of get you some geographical, cultural experience, you got to do it. I don't, I've lived overseas for 28 years, so I've been everywhere, and I never thought I would ever travel as much and see as much as I ever saw in my life. So why is that important? Because it gives me different perspective. So when I make decisions for people, for the organization, and for those those stakeholders I keep talking about, I have a very different view than maybe somebody who's just been in one country or one part of the world their whole life. I mean, you get very, very isolated. And I think we all work now, and if you're in a multinational company, it's most likely in multi countries. So you got to have the perspective of others when you start to make decisions that impact your company. And if you can get that, you can get those diverse experiences, and you can change every 2 to 3 years and not stick in a discipline. I think that would really elevate you fast. And you've got to stretch yourself. If you're uncomfortable, that's a good thing. If you're constantly uncomfortable, that means you're learning. And it's okay to
Yes.
make a few errors and mistakes. Do it early on in your career, because it's probably not going to impact the company much. You do it later in your life and you're in a bigger role, it has enormous implications. So it's okay to learn and fail, fast in young in your career, because you can always pivot and change and try something new. It gets tougher when you
Yes.
get older.
Mm.
That's my
Well,
advice.
some great advice indeed. Thanks for all the examples and case studies and sharings today, Jim. Keep inspiring, keep people, keep pushing the need and making a dent with Ion at TE. And it's been a pleasure to have you today with us.
Thank you, Radu, and really appreciate the questions. Great conversation. Have a great day, my friend.
You too.
Once again, this is Radu Palamariu. Thank you so much for listening to this Leaders in Supply Chain podcast episode. If you're listening it on iTunes, Spotify, or any other channel, we'd love if you leave us a review. And of course, share this with anyone you think might enjoy it. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.